They said
The
she
trail
was
ahead is
invisible.
uncertain. Are you
A
ready?
woman sleeping behind
I trust you.
dumpsters, with
Then
nothing
let's
but
go.
torn shoes and shaking hands. But when she whispered, "I'm not worth much, sir, but I can cook." The mountain man who lived alone for 20 years made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Right finger if you believe even broken lives deserve a second chance. Hit subscribe now, because the wind howled through the pine-covered ridges like it had something to mourn, sweeping down the mountain in long aching breaths as Elijah Crow tightened the straps on the firewood sled behind his cabin, the same cabin he had built with his own hands nearly 2 decades ago after the world below betrayed him in ways he never spoke about. And as he straightened his broad frame, gray already threading through his dark beard despite him not yet reaching 50, he noticed movement near the old service road where the forest thinned into rock and gravel, a shape too small and too fragile to belong in a place where even wolves hesitated to wander, and at first he thought it was a deer caught in brush or maybe a stray dog, but when he stepped closer, boots crunching softly against frost, he realized it was a woman, curled beside an abandoned maintenance shed like something the world had thrown away, her coat far too thin for mountain winter, her hair tangled and damp, her hands trembling as she tried to light a match that kept dying in the wind, and when she looked up at him her eyes widened not with fear but with apology, as though her very existence were an inconvenience, and before he could speak she rushed the words out in a cracked whisper, "I'm not worth much, sir, but I can cook," as if that single skill were all she had left to bargain for survival. And something inside Elijah, something long frozen beneath years of silence, shifted painfully, because no human being should ever have to introduce themselves like that. He hadn't planned on speaking to anyone that day, or any day really, because solitude was the only thing that kept the past quiet, and the mountain had been good for that, offering routine and stillness and the comfort of knowing nothing unexpected would knock on his door. Yet here she was, unexpected and shaking, with bruises fading along her wrist and a scar near her temple that looked too deliberate to be accidental. And when he asked her name she hesitated like she'd forgotten it mattered before finally saying, "Mara," barely louder than the wind, and when he asked what she was doing up here she swallowed and said she'd been walking for days, following roads that led nowhere because anywhere was better than where she'd come from, and though he told himself not to get involved, because involvement always cost something, he found himself handing her his thermos, watching her hands wrap around it like warmth itself was a miracle, and in that moment Elijah realized the mountain had just tested him in a way no storm ever could. He brought her to the cabin with strict rules spoken in a tone meant to sound firm but lacking its usual edge, telling her she could stay 1 night, maybe 2, until the storm passed, and she nodded too quickly, gratitude spilling from her eyes before he even finished speaking. And inside the cabin she moved like someone afraid to disturb the air, flinching when a pan clattered, apologizing when nothing was wrong, and when she noticed the old cast iron stove she asked softly if she could cook something simple with what little food he had, and when he shrugged she worked with quiet focus, turning basic ingredients into a warm stew that filled the room with a scent he hadn't known he missed until it wrapped around his chest and squeezed, because it reminded him of a life before loneliness chose him. And when they ate in silence he realized he hadn't shared a meal with another human in 11 years. That night he lay awake listening to the wind and the faint sound of her breathing from the small cot near the fireplace, and memories crept in uninvited, his wife's laugh, the baby blanket folded and never used, the court papers that said he'd lost everything except his name, and he clenched his jaw until morning came, because the mountain had taught him survival, not healing, and healing was dangerous. Days passed, then weeks. Mara didn't ask for more. She cleaned, cooked, mended torn gloves, shoveled snow even when her hands bled, and never once complained. When he tried to pay her she shook her head, saying she was already being given too much, and when he asked about her past she smiled gently and said, "Some stories hurt better when they stay quiet," and he respected that because he had many of his own buried beneath the same rule. But the mountain notices things people don't. He saw how she startled at raised voices even when none were directed at her. How she froze if a man's shadow passed too close when they went down to the supply town once a month. How she woke screaming some nights and pressed her hand over her mouth to stop the sound before it escaped. And slowly, without either of them acknowledging it, she stopped being a guest and became something dangerously close to home. The first twist came the day a black SUV climbed the forbidden road. It didn't belong here. Didn't belong on Elijah's mountain. He saw it from the ridge and felt dread crawl up his spine, because no one came this far unless they were looking for something, or someone, and when the vehicle stopped near the cabin and two men stepped out in clean boots that had never touched snow before, Mara went pale as ash and whispered, "They found me, like a death sentence already written." That was when Elijah learned she hadn't just run from poverty. She had run from ownership. And the men knocking on his door weren't asking, they were collecting.